I know this post is going to cost me followers. I don't value followers at any cost. Today I want to talk about something that hasn't been addressed anywhere near enough in the animal care sector, and that's Palestine. If you'll allow me to speak candidly, the animal care field is overwhelmingly white, and the profession as a whole has been strikingly silent on this. In the same way that the animal care industry broadly has continued to tolerate the outdated treatment of animals, long past the point when science has discredited these methods, we've continued to tolerate these outdated practices both here and abroad. Silence itself becomes reinforcement, and it allows these systems to persist. I want to define a word that gets used a lot, but a lot of people don't understand: Zionism. Zionism emerged in the late 19th century as a nationalist movement to establish a Jewish homeland rooted in centuries of brutal persecution and anti-Semitism in Europe. While its roots contained an understandable desire for safety, its real-world implementation in the 20th century became something else entirely: a settler colonial project. And that means that instead of coexisting with the indigenous people who already lived on the land, Zionism sought to displace them through land and power, force, and exclusion. In 1948, this really came to a head in what has become known as the Nakba, or catastrophe, where over 750,000 Palestinians were forcibly removed from their indigenous land and their homes destroyed. Their right to return to their rightful land has been systematically denied since then. And the nation of Israel did not exist before 1948. This wasn't a temporary conflict. It set the stage for decades of occupation and structural inequality, not to mention the ongoing and continued dispossession of indigenous people in the region. Now, naturally, we are surrounded by propaganda on this issue in the West, left and right. Let me give you an example. Many people will refer to this as a war, but a war in this case would involve two militaries, not one. Palestine has no army, no air force, no navy. Objectively, what we have seen is a heavily armed state backed by the most powerful military in the world, using fighter jets, tanks, and bombs against civilian populations. And these populations have no comparable weapons. That is not a war, that is an occupation. The continuity and timing of this really matters, because many of us Americans think that actions like genocide and the erasure of culture and people is something long in the past that we had nothing to do with in present day. Those are things that our ancestors used to do in the 1800s, and you can't blame us, that's long behind us. But the hard truth is that settler colonialism has never ended. So what we're seeing today in Palestine is the latest iteration of the same logic: land grabs, forced removal, and the denying of basic human rights. Zionism, as it has been practiced and executed in the real world, is nothing about safety. It's about the continued expansion and control over vulnerable populations. So how does that make the current generation, us living here in the United States of America, complicit, even racist and morally wrong for allowing this to continue? Because we've inherited these systems, we benefit from them, and we do nothing to dismantle them. In fact, we continue to choose, through our silence, through our support for Israel, to continue upholding them. This is not a case where we can just blame our ancestors and said they did a horrible thing and walk away. We're continuing to enable it to this day. I want to acknowledge something directly. October 7th, 2023. Hamas carried out a brutal attack, and I don't condone it. But as someone who studies behavior science, I want to put this in terms of predictability, not justification. If you subject a population to systemic displacement, violence, and humiliation for decades, behavior science tells us that explosive retaliation becomes inevitable. In other words, what makes behavior science a science is its predictive ability. That doesn't make it right, but that does make it understandable. And October 7th was predicted in 1948. As someone who works with animals myself, I understand that when an animal is subjected to relentless mistreatment, that animal is going to lash out in some way at some point. Oppressed people, too, will lash out at some point in order to protect what is theirs. And since October 7th, the Israeli response to this has been nothing short of catastrophic. As of August 2025, over 63,000 Palestinians have been killed. That's the official toll. The actual number is likely much, much higher, many times that. The overwhelming majority of these people are women, children, civilians who are just trying to live their life like you and me. Entire neighborhoods have been completely reduced to rubble. The vast majority of these weapons are American-made, and yet in our own field, a field that is allegedly concerned with compassion, concerned with ethics, there's been almost total silence. And this is a symptom of something much bigger in our culture that I think we are all in denial about. In other words, if we can't recognize colonial violence in Palestine, how do we expect to recognize the remnants of colonial violence in our own practices? This is why I'm speaking up. Being pro-Palestinian is not about being anti-Jewish. It's about being anti-colonial and being pro-human rights. Zionism as a political project is objectively harmful on a massive scale. Now, it's not because Jewish people are harmful, to be clear, but because settler colonialism in any form is wrong. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about 1800s in the Western Hemisphere or if we're talking about 2025 in Gaza. The results are the same. Vulnerable populations bear the brunt of violence. Many of us don't want to be bothered with that inconvenient fact. As animal professionals, we claim to spend our lives creating environments where dogs, cats, and horses can live without fear. We know firsthand, more than most professions, the damage that coercion causes. We know in the animal care sector what happens when power is abused and what that does to the victims. The very values that drive us to advocate for the better treatment of animals should drive us to speak up and speak up loudly, even when it's unpopular, for oppressed people everywhere. My ask is simple. Seek out Palestinian voices, understand the actual history and not just the headlines. Don't accept the framing that this is a two-sides conflict. It is not. It is an occupation. And the way I look at it is, if we want to live our own values and be proponents of compassion and justice, then our care doesn't stop with the animals in front of us. It extends to people as well, especially the people who are most vulnerable. And right now, that means Palestinians.